Three,
Right.
2, 1. Here we go. Hello there, whiskey pot. Hello there, Whiskey Posse. Welcome to another episode of Not Another Whiskey Podcast. I am your host, Nicholas Polacki, joined as always with my beautiful co-host, Mr. Mitch Bouchard. Mitch, I love the spectacles today, by the way.
Beautiful.
Like those glasses.
Nice. Thanks, man. These are my special glasses.
To be fair, I've been drinking since breakfast. So
I'm getting to that point where I need special reading glasses now. Have you got there yet?
I had my eyes lasered.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, because I couldn't see long distance, and it's a game changer. It's not a particularly pleasant recovery and experience. My eyes are super sensitive. For almost a year, my eyes were really sensitive to light, to the point that I actually went for dinner with somebody about 3 weeks after I got my eyes done, and I was crying at the dinner table and I had to get up and leave. Like, I had to leave the dinner. I was with my business partner and the head buyers for all of Total Wine and More, the wonderful Mr. Michael Lowry, and he was there with his partner, and I was like, this is the first time I met him, and I had tears streaming down my face, like I was like seriously like watching some sad rom-com. And yeah,
here's an old person question though. What about close up? Can you read stuff close up still?
I can read stuff close up.
So I can't.
Do you find yourself pulling things further away from you so you can get your
big time? Like, honestly, see, like I did a whiskey dinner last night, right? We were chatting about the whiskeys, and obviously that's fine. But then someone goes like, "What's the ABV on it?" And you know yourself, when you talk about so many whiskeys, you're like, "Ah, I can't remember the ABV." See, trying to see the ABV in a bottle now, brutal for me. I'm like, "Can you read this for me?" You know, like.
Are you gonna have one of those little chain necklaces with the little readers?
Yeah,
you like change out your glasses on.
Gonna go Charlie McLean, man.
Or the little nose ones. Where you're going to get the bifocals where you can look up or look down.
I need to. Do you know the ones that I like? And who is our boy in New Jersey? Your cousin-in-law, big firefighter dude.
Oh, Jimmy Patterson.
Jimmy. He used to have these really cool things on the back of his phone, and they just flip out, and then you pop them on your nose. I need to get some of them.
I'll speak to him and find out where he got them.
Yeah.
And shout out to Jimmy. He's doing some great stuff on Glenfiddich and the rest of the William Grandson stuff. But
does he listen to the show?
He will do now.
He better fucking listen to the
show. I think he does, actually. He texted me about it a couple of times, so yeah.
Nice. So how was Vegas, dude? You were just in Vegas, right?
I was. Vegas was Vegas, Mitch. So, it was a great time, got to see some phenomenal places. We were out with the team at Aria, out with the team at, MGM, and right across all their properties. So just fantastic. I mean, just great stuff. Like, we're out to see the guys at Wakuda, where I'm sure you'll post a wee video earlier. I had one of the most impressive desserts I've ever had in my life, followed by a few glasses of Shibui. So thanks to the team there for carrying our brand. But yeah, it was brilliant. So
nice.
No complaints.
Dude, Aria always reminds me, remember that time with Jody? And we'd done like a full day out and like going to bars all night in Vegas. And then we were staying in the area and we walk in there and there's like a massive queue for the nightclub. And we turn around to Jody and we're like, all right, come on, Mr. Vegas. You got 5 minutes to get us in here. And we timed him and it was like 3.5 minutes. Not only did he get us into the club, we were sitting at a private table with a bottle of Balvenie on it. And we're like, all right, dude, you are Mr. Vegas. You win.
It was pretty impressive. I remember that one. It was good. Well, we've got a cracking show lined up, Mitch, right?
Yeah, so the subject of today's show... The subject...
Oh, wonderful, Mr. Bond.
That was my Sean Connery impression.
Go ahead.
What are we going to talk about? What we're going to talk about is, I think, something that's kind of close to our hearts, right? Both of us being whiskey entrepreneurs. You've got your own business with Shibui. I've got my own business with Copper Cairn. So we thought we would look at whiskey entrepreneurs, both past and present, which I think is kind of cool because, there's a lot of great stories in the history of whiskey on how people really brought it to life and created their own story. But there's also really cool stories right now of people doing the same thing in the modern day whiskey world, right? So that's what we're going to look at today. So here's an interesting thing, Nicholas. When we discussed this, You had someone in mind, and I didn't like that person because I didn't agree that they were an entrepreneur. So let's define to everyone how we're talking about a whiskey entrepreneur here.
Yep. So a whiskey entrepreneur, I think what we're going to establish is someone who's done something off their own bat. So not somebody who's in the business working for another company but does innovation, but more someone that's created something from scratch, created their own distillery, started a brand, done something that's reshaped or defined one of the categories. I think maybe that they're experiencing, which I love. Like I love the history of whiskey, and I like the history of the people in whiskey. So I think that this is one of the things that Mitch, you and I have talked about kind of off the show, which is just like there are so many of them, and
Yep.
especially now with new distilleries, the craft whiskey movement, not just in Scotland, but some of the stuff in America, which I will touch on later on, because I've got someone up my sleeve that I think is a really exciting historical story that some people in Scotland may not know, for one of the biggest brands in the world. But yeah, so I think is that a fair assumption that defines the whiskey entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think so. And, to back that up, I put out a little story on Instagram on our Not Another Whiskey podcast Instagram. If you're not following us there, by the way, little plug, just to ask people who they thought was their whiskey entrepreneur. And we got quite a lot back from that, which was really cool to see. And it was almost like I didn't have to do that definition to people that follow us because they got it straight away. So I just wanted to read out some of the comments that we got from that. Words Over Whiskey calls out Annabelle Thomas from Knocknean, which is a great shout. I remember I went to Knocknean when they literally first opened their doors, and I remember sitting down, and I knew nothing about this distillery. Went over there. They knew we were coming. Sat down, and Annabelle sat down with us, and I was like, "Oh, so what is it you do here?" And someone like tapped me on the shoulder. And was like, "She's the owner," and I was like, "All right, cool." But like super cool, super down to earth. Just showed us around. It was great and amazing to see, what Annabelle and Knocknean are doing right now. So definitely an entrepreneur there. Andrew Flatt from Brora. What's up, Andrew? Shame you didn't let me into your distillery last week, but I won't hold that against you. He calls out Mac McPherson from the Malt Room in Inverness, which is another great shout. Next time you're up in this neck of the woods, Nicholas, I need to take you up there. They've got this great room up the top of the Malt Room. He totally looked after us when we were there. It was about maybe 3 years ago now, actually, and I haven't been back since, but I definitely need to go and see that place again. Yep. Liz Locke, great shout out here, which was Sukhinder Singh for starting online whiskey in 1999 when .coms were falling. So you agree with that one on Sukhinder?
I think he redefined what it meant to be able to go and buy whiskey and getting access to whiskey. So a lot of people in Scotland specifically, you can go and visit distilleries and get access to stuff that you really do need to do planes, trains and automobiles to get your hands on. And Sukhinder, I think, not only championed that for the UK, but he then made it, like he brought Scotland's number one, in our opinion, number one export outside of oil, but number one export to the masses around the world, and created a standard within that as well. So it was always a very positive hub for whiskey. Even if they were writing about brands or scoring brands or kind of doing tastings on brands, I always thought it was really positive. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, totally. And then obviously what he's doing now with Elixir and Tormore, the new distillery on Isla, which I'm blanking on the name of right now. Really cool to see all that going on with what he's doing. So taking it to the next level and actually going and making whiskey. Ian Bruce 83, John and George Urquhart from Gordon MacPhail. That's a bit of a no-brainer, I think. Gordon MacPhail, biggest independent bottler now. Amazing work that they've done. Obviously just opened the cairn as well. And then our good friend Becky Paskin jumped on. Becky had quite a few for us actually, including Ian Croucher at North Star Spirits, which is a great shout. Ian's been on the show before when we were down in Campbelltown. Our good friend Deval Gandhi, who's used to be the Lakes, used to be Macallan, now doing his own thing, which is great to see. Alison Park from Bren Whiskey, another great one. Becky also called out Annabelle Thomas again, and Jackie Saikan, who's the former Old Forester master blender, who's gone in to start her own bourbon, Hidden Barn, along with her own line of whiskey-inspired fragrances. So
great shout out there from people within the business. I think that there's definitely a few potential guests for the show within that lineup, so that's exciting.
yeah.
But before we get to our chat this week, Mitch, what are you sipping on? What are you drinking?
Well, I don't know if you guys remember, but the last episode that we did, I mentioned a little brand called Turntable. These had literally just arrived on my doorstep when we recorded the last time, and I've actually had some time to sit down and have a look at these. And I'm super impressed with these. So to give you guys a little bit of background, if you haven't heard of Turntable Spirits yet, the two brothers, Ali and Gordon Stevenson, and they've come up with this new brand of blended Scotch whiskies. And they've been in the industry for 20 years. I need to sit down and kind of have a chat with them. I'd like to hear their story. But they've basically created 3 different expressions of their blended whiskey. And they've really related it to music. If you hadn't got the turntable kind of terminology there, that's how it all goes. So the 3 different ones, the first one is, it's called Joy, Discovery, and Intervention. And I love this. And the cool thing about this, Nicholas, I was showing you kind of over the camera, the packaging of it. And what I love is they've gone kind of compass box here. So what they've done is they've been very transparent about the casks and the distilleries that they've been using. So for this first one, they've put in Knockdo Chinkapin barrel, 17% of that, 40% Linkwood, 24% Girvan X red wine barrel, and then a Strathclyde X cognac cask. So this is for track number 1. And this is like super, super fresh. Get like tropical notes from this. Really, I could see this, a summer's day. You definitely want to sip on this. Probably make a really good highball as well. But I think out of the 3 of them, that is my favorite. Track number 2 is called Firestarter for obvious reasons, because we've got 40% Kalila in here. There's a really nice bonfire smoke, but then you get some Cameron Bridge popping through, which gives it this coconutty vanilla note. Then there's some Ben Rinnes and some Invergordon in there. This is the biggest one with regards to sort of ppms, smoke content really punches through. And then there's my least favorite, and I'm not saying it's bad, it's just not to my taste. I do love the name of this though, Purple Haze. And this is very sherry related. This is a full-bodied sherry bomb. It's got some Craigellachie Oloroso sherry butts in there. We've got some Balmenic Pedro Jimenez sherry puncheons and an Invergordon sherry barrel. So this is just a big, viscous, full-bodied, tannic note. And actually, this is the first one that I tried. And I wish it wasn't the first one because it's my least favorite. But like I say, these are fantastic. Really, really enjoying these. Thank you guys for sending them along. We need to get them on the show, Nicholas, and we need to get some samples to you as well. These are all at 46% ABV. And I kind of had a little look on them. Master Malt are selling these for £69 a bottle. So cool. Really, really nice. Really enjoying them. Well done, guys, on your new whiskies that you've brought out. So anyway, that was quite a lot on what I've been drinking. What about you, Palaki? What have you been drinking?
I've got 1 dram in front of me.
No,
so
not
I'm drinking a glass of Revival right now. So as you probably heard me just crack the bottle while you were speaking, because Jesus, man, you go on. But no, I opened that one up. There's a cracker, non-chill filter, natural colour whiskey from Gleneagles, 46% ABV. It's sweet, it's rich, it's got a little hint of sea salt caramel in the back end. Just a really pretty whiskey, part of kind of their non-age statement lineup. I've had that bottle for a while actually, but it's just delicious. It's a delicious drinker. Like it doesn't, every time I go back to it, it still overperforms of what my expectations are going to be. It's just really pretty and great, well-made whiskey.
That's interesting you're chatting about drinking that, because I was chatting about it today to my good friend Neil Strachan, who's just taken over the distillery ambassador job within that group of distilleries.
Awesome.
So brand foreman. So yeah, he's promised to take me up there soon, and he's got some pretty sexy stuff that he's been playing about with up there. So that's kind of exciting.
So before we get kicked off then with our chat on entrepreneurs, Mitch, should we chat about some of the things in the news?
In the news, what's been happening in the whiskey news? What's hot and what is not? You want to kick this off?
Sure, no problem at all. So basically, we'll start with Kilchoman. this is not really a whiskey story, but it is pretty cool. The guys at Kilcoman have purchased a derelict Bentley mansion and 9 acres of land located in St. Philip because they are building, drumroll, a rum distillery. So these guys, these whiskey producers, plan to erect buildings around the house for rum distillery, mill, cask warehousing, and they're also going to purchase sugarcane from the mansions surrounding fields. And it sounds like they're going to do that kind of almost like farm to table style of rum. So that's pretty cool. Like I think Anthony Wills has teamed up with Frank Ward, the former managing director of the Barbados distillery Mount Gay. So you've got some rum big hitters. Is that what you call them? Rum big hitters?
I don't know. Yeah, rummers, rum runners.
Rummers, the Rumpelstiltskins of the rum world. I don't know. Either way, pretty cool stuff. 22.5 million on a funding package these guys spent on it, with obviously raising that money and funds to kind of put it apart. But they're going to put the brand across 50 different countries: France, Germany, US, China being its biggest markets. So it's pretty cool. Like pretty fun stuff.
Kilhoman, I mean, what that must be like 12, 13, maybe 15 years old now, something like that. Do you think Anthony Wills is just like, oh man, I'm getting pissed off with the Isle of Weather. Fuck this. Let's go to Barbados. We've made enough money here. We can do this.
100%. It's eating him up of it. He's like, do you know what we really need? Barbados. I hear him.
Barbados.
I'm in. Sign me up if he needs an ambassador. Put me out there.
It's like he's gone. Shall we just see if we can write off a Barbados home? Oh yeah, fuck it. We'll shove a rum distillery in there. That'll work. No problem at all. Good fun, good times. Right. So something that's not so much news, but a correction from our Whiskey Awards episode. So I put this in here that we mentioned, but it was me, Nicholas. It was totally me. So I mentioned that the San Francisco Spirit Award winner this year was Glen Scotia 25. It was actually the wrong year that I got for that. So well done me for not being able to read a year. And I was corrected by our friend Gary Mills from Glen Scotia. Hey, Gary, thanks for taking the time to correct my stupid ass there. But congratulations to Loch Lomond. So where we are right now with the San Francisco Spirit Awards they've given all the medals out, but they haven't said the best of the best. And Loch Lomond actually picked up a total of 17 medals, including 8 double golds, which is pretty cool. So yeah, these awards are going to be announced later in the year as we record this. It's going to be in Vegas, mate, in July. So you'll probably be there and you'll be able to drink them all afterwards.
I will. Honestly, I actually might be back there. I've already been invited back. I was there this week, but
of course,
like most things, it's the call to nature to go back to Las Vegas and drink whiskey. Okay.
If I have to twist my arm.
So moving on to more whiskey news, our friends at Loch Lee have debuted a cask strength whiskey, which is pretty fun. So this is a Lowland distillery, Loch Lee. I think it's a first ever cask strength whiskey, which is pretty cool. So they're based in Ayrshire. This is the cask strength batch 1, bottled straight from cask at 60.1% ABV, so it's not for the faint of heart. It's been aged and matured in ex-bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks, and said to work particularly well at very high strength, amplifying all the fruit notes and nut notes, those kind of cereal flavours of the house style of whiskey. So I'm sure they'll be sending casks to Mitch Bouchard because he's probably already requested them. This is John Campbell's juice, so master blender. And with a phenomenal background, and he's probably one of the nicest people in the whiskey business that I've met.
Yeah.
There are many to choose from, but he is a rock star within that. And so I'm really excited to hopefully get to taste it.
Yeah, and shout out to Sarah Snedden, who I managed to catch up with last week down at the Highlander. And if you guys want to know more about Loch Lee, then check out our episode we did quite a while back where we sat down with John at the distillery and talked about what they're doing there. So really interesting stuff. Gleneagles has brought out their own line of whiskies, which is pretty cool. So I like this. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you do that, right?
Feels weird that they didn't have one, right?
Right, yeah. I like I don't know if you've seen the artwork on this, but I think it's pretty funky. It's very similar to, I think, a collaboration they did with Glenturret a while back. Yep. And it relates to all the pursuits you can do at Gleneagles, darling.
Yep.
So fishing, falconry, shooting, and of course, horse riding. But kind of cool, they've related, it's different distilleries for all the different activities. The fishing bottle is from Royal Brackla. Kalila is the source distillery for the falconry. And the one that's really quite unique and quite, well, limited, I suppose, is the shooting expression, because that's from the Imperial Distillery. As you guys listening probably know, the Imperial Distillery doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down in the 80s. So only 191 bottles available of that one. And then the last one, which is horse riding, is from Tobermory. So that's kind of cool. Now,
Yep.
I haven't seen, it says in this release that they are going to be obviously to buy by the dram in the hotel bars, and you can purchase it from their whiskey shop there, which the full set is going to be £1,200 or $1,491 in your funny money, Nicholas. I don't know if this is going to be available anywhere else. I couldn't really find any more information on that. I'm assuming it would be something that's going to be specific for Gleneagles, since they can sell everything there. But yeah, cool
Yep.
to see that going on.
Those bottles remind me a little bit of the old. I think Macallan did the release like this. That was like it was round about like the spay and the fishing beat and things like that. And some I think they were distillery exclusives. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but just from the color Pantones, the kind of artwork's really
Yeah.
kind of cool. Almost looks like a kind of 1930s, 1940s advertisement for whiskey and outdoor pursuits. It's very cool. I actually really like them. They look
Yeah.
lovely.
So a good excuse to go up to Gleneagles and drink some whiskey then. Next time you come
Absolutely,
over.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The next little piece of news, I actually really like this one. This is almost talking about entrepreneurial. This is a great segue into once we start to speak about these entrepreneurs. But these guys as well, Stonning Distillery, it's a Danish whiskey company, and these guys started to run into a bit of bottle shortages, and with the supply and demand issues that kind of went on across after COVID and things like that, and it's still ongoing for certain brands. It left Stonning without its signature bottles and forced the guys to kind of rethink a little bit about what they were doing and how they were going to get people to get their actual bottles. And what they came up with was, let's give them an unlabeled bottle. So this is for Stonning Rye, like Chaos or Smoke. And it's a selection of, they basically come with a sticker inside it where you get to basically do your own limited edition DIY bottling, which I think is pretty cool. You get to kind of design your own stuff. So these limited edition bottles are available at the Whisky Exchange for about 60 quid. So $74.79, which is very specific instead of just saying $75. But yeah, $60 from Whisky Exchange. And I think that's pretty cool. Like the collections are also available from Masters of Malt and Ocado, included their limited edition rye. But I think this is pretty cool. Like I think this is
Yeah.
quite an innovative way to kind of clear up something that's obviously something's out with their control. And how can you control something that's out
Yeah,
with their control? Well, let consumers go and do something fun.
it's a quirky brand, man, and they're doing a lot of investment right now. I know a few people that have jumped on board with Stoning, and they're making some waves. This goes back to when I started with Diageo. I remember we did this with Diageo, and when I say we, it was kind of when we were doing an event once, and it was Barry Wilson that I used to work with, and me and my boss got a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label and just got a Sharpie and wrote "Happy Birthday" all over it, and then drew a bunch of cocks on it. So that's kind of the same thing, you know?
Things never change, right? Jeez, man. That's the
Right.
standard of banter that we've created here, right?
Right. Anyway, on with the show. Let's get into this, Nicholas. We start talking about whiskey entrepreneurs, and we talked about we're going to mention some of our whiskey entrepreneurs that we've picked and selected. So I'm going to kick this off, and I'm going to go back in time here and look at one from the past. So I've picked Andrew Usher as my first one. So for those that haven't heard about Andrew Usher, he was born in 1824, Edinburgh boy, Big Andy, the Whiskey Raj, as we call them in Edinburgh. I think I just made that up. We didn't call him that at all. But he was born into whiskey, essentially. His father, Andrew Senior, just to confuse things, he was a spirits dealer and started his company back in 1813. So by 1846, Andrew Jr. and his brother John became partners in the family business. Then in 1859, they bought Glensine's distillery, renaming it the Edinburgh Distillery, and securing a supply of their single malt. Along with this, they built what was known, well, at the time was the largest warehouse in the heart of Edinburgh in St Leonard's. So I think when it comes to Andrew Usher, the reason I've picked him is he wasn't the first ever whiskey blender out there. He wasn't the first to pioneer this, but he was the first to really recognize a brand, a whiskey brand, and marketing on a brand. And he did that with old vatted Glenlivet, which you can see if you go to the Scotch Malt Whisky Experience in Edinburgh. You can see some really old bottles of that exist still today. So cool to see. And, you know, he worked very closely with John Smith up at Glenlivet to get that liquid down there. Now, one of the things that I heard is it wasn't all Glenlivet that was in there, and it was only around about 12% of that liquid. So a little bit controversial, but again, an entrepreneur sometimes never lets the facts get in the way of a good story, right? So he did a lot of charity work. And, you know, when we talk about Andrew Usher, he started up the Institute of Public Health in the University of Edinburgh. He gifted a building to accommodate it. And for those that have been to, you know, a few music gigs in Edinburgh, then you may have visited Usher Hall, a building that he contributed £100,000 to just before his death. So unfortunately, he never actually saw that completed, and it was opened by his widow in 1914. So there you go, my whiskey entrepreneur from the past, Andrew Usher, Slanch.
Very cool. Slanch of I need. Well, I'm going to take over now, Mitch. I'm going to talk about somebody. I'm going to do stateside stuff here just for fun. So a couple of people, the one from my past and one from my present, and there's a little kind of sneaky hidden twist in my next one. But for this one, I wanted to talk about somebody that I actually personally met just as he was beginning to build this distillery. So the guy I'm going to feature on is a guy called Chip Tate. So for those of you that don't know, Chip Tate was the gentleman who basically built from scratch with his own hands Balcones Distillery. And Balcones, arguably in the United States, defined what craft whiskey could and should look like. A very, very small production site, but all focused on great quality of product. So I think it's fair to say in the USA, as craft distilling boomed, every single man and their dog came to the table like, we've got a craft distillery, usually with the tagline of, we're the first distillery to do this in this town since Prohibition kind of chat, which was fine, right? Not to, everybody's trying to do their best. But within that, there's a fine line between craft and crap. Like some of the juice just wasn't good enough. Like it just wasn't right. And mainly because it was just people that didn't know what they were doing, or that thought they, a passion project, but you know how difficult it is to actually make and distill liquid. Like it really is a talent and an art form. And Chip Tate was a gentleman who came from a chemical engineering background and a chemistry background. He was also I think he had a degree in nuclear physicist. I think I'm not even joking. He's probably one of the smartest, well-read, an infuriatingly smart human being, and probably led to some of the things that happened with Balcones. So this is a guy that built this stuff from scratch. I actually met him. I was doing a Balvenie tasting in Austin, Texas, and Chip had driven in from Waco. So Chip's from Waco, Texas. He'd come along to the tasting, sat and watched me kind of chat away about whiskies and my thoughts on whiskey. And at the very end, he came up to me, Mitch, and he said, I actually make whiskey myself. I'd like your opinion on it. Can you taste some of it? And you and I have been here before where, kind of home distillers come up and give you something that's crazy moonshine that's going to make you see double and all these other fun stuff. And
yeah,
I said, no problem at all. We'll sit down quietly at the end, and we got a table and a booth, and he started to pour what was his first run of Balcones out in front of me. And I lit up. Like I was like, holy shit, like this stuff is insane. What are you doing? And he was using different corn varietals and sourcing like ancient grains really to produce some of the product that he was making. And arguably Balcones was just a baller brand. They ended up taking on financing from people like Chip, inevitably, long story short, fell out with, and they ended up buying him out of Balcones. But he was the founding father of Balcones. His journey continues. So undeterred by this, he took his buyout money and started up his next business, Tate and Company Distilling. And Tate and Company Distillery will go live, I think, next year. He has, again, he's done it himself, and built 4 copper pot still stills in his new facility, which, you know, all hand hammered. I think it's just incredible. Like this is the length and dedication that these guys go to, but it's really about craftsmanship, dreamers, and, you know, even our good friend Dave Broom referred to Chip as he put the marker in the ground, showing how a small scale distillery could actually work. So for me, he's somebody that is just, you know, a real pioneer, really kind of championed and recreated what craft whiskey distilling could look like, and deserves his place in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I remember meeting Chip once briefly in Vegas. There seems to be a lot of Vegas chat in this episode. But yeah, such a nice guy as well. And for me, that
Yeah,
was like, oh, wait a minute, Texas is doing whiskey now. I remember having that like thought in my head when
yeah.
Balcones
And
came
then
out, you know?
and he really did. And now there's like 4 or 5 really great whiskey distilleries in Texas, hands down, because of Chip Tate. Like
Yeah,
these
yeah.
guys went, oh, wait a minute here, you know, Garrison Brothers and other people like that followed suit. And we're coming up around about the same time, but like it's all like once the benchmark had been set for that quality level, I think a lot of people and other distilleries around the USA lifted their game, and they realized, wait a minute, being craft, just telling people you're craft and artisanal isn't good enough. The liquid needs to perform, and Chip definitely was a pioneer within that.
Yeah, and shout out to our friend Heather Green, who's doing that now
A
in
100%. Actually, I
Texas.
just had a chat with her the other day. So that's another great example. Like we are spoiled for choice. Like Heather would be another person for Milliman Green. And for those of you that can get Milliman Green, listen in the USA, go and buy and drink this brand. The juice is insane. Like I love Heather, and I knew that if she was going to put her name to something, that it was going to be the quality was going to be fantastic. But even for me, man, I was like, this juice is insane. Very, very great. Just
Yeah,
great whiskeys.
yeah, I haven't tried any yet. Heather, send me some over here. What's wrong with
That's all.
you?
It's the part of the Mitch Bouchard begging part portion of Not Another Whiskey podcast.
Hey, it's
Come on, man.
gotta be put in there, man. It's gotta be put in there.
Your
Right,
shelves are
listen,
overflowing.
back to this side of the pond. So I'm gonna go with someone modern as well, because obviously I did an old school one, and this kind of relates to an episode that we did recently. And I suppose this guy is when I was thinking about this, he kind of stuck in my mind because it was so fresh from the conversation that I had with him. And it's a distillery that I go to quite a lot as well, and I see it just going from strength to strength. So it's Billy Walker. I mean, you know, you talk about an entrepreneur
British.
that's done something unbelievable. A boy from your neck of the woods, Nicholas. And you look at what he's done, starting off as a chemist, same as Chip, as what you were chatting about earlier on. And then he's, you know, working for some big companies in production, in blending, and he could have just stayed there and probably been a master blender within those big companies. But his entrepreneurship kicks in 2004 when he acquires 3 distilleries in Glenglassaugh, Ben Riach, and Glendronach. You know, he takes them from strength to strength, and then we see him selling these to Brown Forman in 2016. And as I said to him in the interview, I thought you would have just pissed off on a desert island and that,
Yeah.
you know, taken the money and run. But he's the kind of guy who, in his own words, he had unfinished business to do. So a year later, in 2017, he buys Gleneagles, and, you know, again, talk about a whiskey that went from zero to hero. We see that from 2017 just being a nothing distillery that was basically a filler. Let's face it, it was a filler for Chivas. It was owned by Pernod, to a single malt that wins the best single malt in the world. So, you know, quite an incredible guy who's not shy about pushing the boat out, about experimenting, about bending the rules a little bit, you know, and seeing what he can do. So yeah, I mean, you know, modern entrepreneur for me would definitely be Billy Walker. And if you guys haven't listened to that episode yet, go back, have a listen to that. He gets kind of really down and dirty as to what he's done in his career, and he's pretty open and honest about everything as well, which is cool to hear.
Very cool, mate. Great shout out, and I 100% wholeheartedly agree. So I'm going to dip a little bit into whiskey history here for maybe a little unsung hero. I don't even know if you guys get this brand in the UK, but it's called Uncle Nearest. And this is probably, and in fact, there's an author here, a really great author for insight to it called Kirk Miller, and I'll give him a personal shout out because he's a wonderful human being. But The tagline that he put on this when he wrote about this brand was Uncle Nearest is the most important story in American whiskey history. And I cannot agree more. So basically, there's a gentleman called Nathan Green who, as most people know, the United States has a very checkered history with African Americans. And this gentleman was an African American slave who worked effectively on a farm, and he was the master distiller at basically what was effectively a preacher who was illicitly distilling, and Nathan Green um, was the master distiller at this, and he basically championed and recreated what would become the process. You know, this really really exciting process of whiskey making, and defining the category of Tennessee whiskey. So charcoal filtration, using maple charcoal to filter before the spirit made its way into oak barrels. This was his creation. So most people don't know that this was his creation because they know the other story. So as Nearest Green, Uncle Nearest Green, which was his nickname, worked to basically make this brand, the chore boy who worked for him and was his pal, these guys were friends, it wasn't his slave, this was his buddy, was Jack Daniels. So Jack Daniel learned how to make whiskey from Nathan Green. And I just think it's so cool that this is this almost like forgotten, unspoken about hero. Credit where credit's due here is there's a woman that was like, this is an amazing story, we should bring this back. So her name is Fawn Weaver. She's a historian, kind of real estate investor and best-selling author. And she was like, this story needs to be told. She went back and worked with Green's family members and basically built a distillery to honor this gentleman. And Victoria Eddy Butler, who is the great granddaughter of Nearest Green, it helped put together the first two blends and is now becoming this master, working with the master blending team. There's multiple people work on it, but she's part of this team that do all of this. And even better than that, like Jack Daniels and the folks at Brown Forman. So like I say, credit where credit's due. These guys came out and were like, this is one of the most important stories that you guys need to read about, have helped champion and support this brand come to fruition. And they are one of the fastest growing bourbon brands now in the US market. But it's a bit of twofold, right? You've got this new brand coming to focus to recreate the liquids of Uncle Nearest. But you've also got the man himself, Nathan Green, who really recreated and who pioneered, this kind of charcoal mellowing process. And I just think it's such a cool story and it's great to see that liquid, multiple award-winning juices coming into the market again, which I think is super awesome.
No, it's a good brand, man. It is available in the UK, and I've tried it before, actually, because our good friend Tracy Franklin, obviously, was part of that brand for a while. Again, who's been on the show. So if you want to know about Uncle Nearest, go back and check out that episode where she talks about it in detail. But yeah, very cool brand, and it's good to see that story being told. I think when you look at US history, a lot of that kind of stuff gets swept under the carpet, which is absolutely horrendous.
100%. But I think it's, this is a difficult story to tell, right? So first and foremost, but this is a man that, lived under slavery and then as a free man continued to then make whiskey and work as head distiller at these properties, making some of the most impressive whiskey and really, like I said, pioneering that flavor profile for Tennessee whiskeys. Brilliant. Great to hear him come to the forefront and his legacy being honored.
And on that note as well, I think when we look at whiskey entrepreneurs in the past, let's face it, it's a little bit cock heavy. So I delved back and found a female when it comes to a whiskey entrepreneur, because let's face it, there isn't that many of them. I wanted to shout out Helen and Elizabeth Cummings from Cardew, or Cardow, as it was originally called. And, this is, I think for me, this is an amazing story about females within the whiskey industry back in the 1800s, when, like I said, it was very, very male orientated. So their story goes back to 1811, and Helen Cummings and her husband John take out a 19-year lease on the Cardow farm. So they start making whiskey illegally, right? As most people were doing in Speyside at that time. And there's actually a record that goes back and talks about this happening. It was documented by a gentleman called Brian Speller, who wrote about this in his book of The World of Malt Whiskey. So he describes a moment when the excise officer was approaching. And it goes like this. So on one occasion when brewing, she, as in Helen, was warned that they were about to enter her house. There was just enough time to hide the distilling apparatus, to substitute materials of bread making and smear her arms and hands with flour. When the knock came at the door, she opened it with a welcoming smile and the words, "Come in, I've just been baking." So kind of classic example of, making whiskey illegally in Scotland and then hiding it. But as time progresses, what Helen started to do was actually inviting the excise officers round for dinner. And when serving them meals, she would run out the back and raise a red flag to warn everyone in the village down below that they were present, so everyone could hide their illegal stills. So on several occasions, she obviously gets pally with these excise officers, right? And on several occasions, they're like, "Come on, Helen, just give us a little tip. Let us know where all this illegal whiskey making is happening." She refuses several times, but then she gives in. But she accepted the money to kind of do like a setup, if you like. So she basically says to the excise officer, "Go around the corner there, up into the hills, you'll find some illegal whiskey making equipment that's where someone's making a still." Basically, she'd got together with everyone in the area, got all their crap illegal whiskey making stills that they no longer used, and set it up there as a plant, So the excise officer goes up. Yeah, the excise officer goes up, finds all this stuff. He's happy, can take that to their boss. She gets the money, splits it with everyone in the village. Job done, and another great story about illegal whiskey making. But
Very
as we
cool.
progress, kind of what happens with Helen is she eventually passes over the business to Elizabeth, her daughter. And Elizabeth, unfortunately, her husband passes away. She's left with 2 young sons. She's got to manage this distillery. She's a single mum, and she does this amazingly well. What she does is she actually builds a whole new distillery. She creates Cardew as a brand that we know today, and then she'd eventually sell the distillery in 1893 to those blenders that you may have heard of, John Walker and Sons, little guys that own that small brand. She sold that for £20,500, excluding stocks, which is pretty smart, and managed to get her son, John, a seat at the board at John Walker. So very, very smart lady, talking about an entrepreneur, next level stuff right there. So Elizabeth, Helen, Cummings, amazing work. Well done. I salute you.
We tip our hat to you. Well played. Mitch, that was a banging show. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
it was fun. Hope everybody else listening in enjoyed the show.
What are we doing next?
That's a great question. What are we doing next? I don't know. You've got the lineup usually of guests. Actually, I tell you who we're trying to get on the show, Keith Bonington. So we're trying to get him. He's a gentleman that I work with at Everington that's now doing some IB stuff and multiple whiskies that I think are insanely good.
Well, so that's what we're trying to do, but I can tell you what we're actually doing because I do have the schedule in front of us. So the next episode after this, I went down to the Cairn Distillery and sat down with the guys there, and then we managed to get our friend Mary Winters on the line, who's the distillery manager there. So we're going to be talking all things Cairn, again, another new distillery, bringing you all the fresh news from all the fresh distilleries in Scotland, right here, right now. Well, not right now, next week.
Are you ready to drink? There you go. Well,
all right, guys, but thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Check us out on our website. Follow us on any platform, I should say, that you listen to your podcasts on. Give us a wee review. That'd be nice. We'd like that.
Thanks
Nicholas would like that.
Bye.
See you.